It was a cold, misty evening when Daniel, a young college student, was driving home on a long, deserted road after visiting his parents in a nearby town. The road was flanked by dense trees on either side, and the fog that rolled in made it even harder to see beyond the few feet illuminated by his car's headlights. He was tired but determined to make it back to campus before midnight. As he drove, Daniel noticed something up ahead, a figure standing by the roadside, barely visible through the thick fog. As he got closer, he realized it was a young woman, no more than 20, wearing a light-colored dress, and she looked drenched. Her long dark hair clung to her face, and she stood shivering in the cold night air. It seemed strange, but Daniel couldn't leave her out there alone in the middle of nowhere. He slowed the car down, rolled down the window, and asked, "Do you need a ride?" The girl nodded silently and climbed into the back seat. Her face was pale, and her eyes downcast as if she had been through something terrible. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine but shook it off, attributing it to the cold air seeping into the car. "Where are you headed?" Daniel asked, trying to make conversation, but the girl simply whispered, "Just down the road, to the old Willow Creek Bridge." Daniel wasn't familiar with the area, but he nodded and continued driving. The silence in the car was heavy, only broken by the occasional rustling of leaves outside. Daniel glanced at the rearview mirror every now and then, and each time he did, the girl was staring straight ahead, her face expressionless, hands clasped tightly in her lap. As they neared the bridge, the air inside the car grew colder. Daniel could feel an unsettling weight pressing down on him. But before he could say anything, the girl spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is where I need to get off." Daniel pulled the car over near the bridge. He turned around to tell her they had arrived, but to his shock, the back seat was empty. The girl had vanished. His heart raced, and a wave of confusion and fear washed over him. Had she slipped out without him noticing? He was sure he had been watching the road closely, but he hadn't heard the door open or close. Panicking, Daniel stepped out of the car and looked around, calling out for the girl, but there was no sign of her. Just the eerie quiet of the night and the distant sound of water rushing beneath the old bridge. His mind raced with questions, but then he remembered a local legend his parents had told him long ago, about a young woman who had died in a tragic accident on this very bridge years ago. She had been on her way to meet her fiancé but never made it. The story went that she still haunted the road, appearing to drivers, hitching a ride, only to vanish when they reached the bridge where she died. Chills ran down Daniel's spine as the pieces fell into place. He had picked up the ghost of the vanishing hitchhiker. Without another thought, Daniel jumped back into his car and sped off, the eerie encounter leaving him shaken. For the rest of the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still watching him from the shadows. The next morning, determined to find answers, Daniel visited the town's library. After some digging, he found an old newspaper article about the accident on Willow Creek Bridge. The article confirmed his suspicions. A girl matching the description of his passenger had indeed died in a car crash there, over 50 years ago. Many locals had claimed to see her spirit on misty nights, looking for a ride to the bridge that would forever be her final destination. Daniel would never forget that night, and he never drove down that lonely road again. But the legend of the vanishing hitchhiker lived on. as new drivers passing through on foggy nights would sometimes claim to see a girl standing by the roadside, waiting for a ride to nowhere.